All right, y'all, we are back. Day 15, I think. I don't know, I've lost track of the Sam Bankman-Fried trial. I'm Carly Riley. I've been going to court every day to cover every moment of this trial. And oh my God, I'm like still numb from today. I don't even know what I feel or what I think. That's not true. I have so many thoughts and feelings, and I'm going to share all of them right now. But Sam, we finished getting the direct questioning of Sam by his own defense counsel, and then he was cross-examined. And I think I said last week that there's a chance Sam was going to get obliterated in cross-examination. I mean, I definitely think you could make a solid argument that Sam got obliterated in cross-examination today. I mean, look, you never know how a jury is reacting to something, but if the reaction of all of us is anything to go on, and frankly, and you'll hear about a little bit about this later probably, like I'm probably more sympathetic to him than a lot of folks today, and I'll get into that, but like it was bad. I don't know what his strategy was here, but he basically refused to answer anything straightforwardly or directly, even when it seemed very benign to do so. Like questions about, like, you as the CEO of FTX wanted to safeguard customer assets. And I think he said yes to some version of that question. But then it would be like, you made public statements indicating that you would safeguard customer assets. And he'd be like, I don't recall. And then she'd ask something else around that. And he'd be like, I don't remember. I don't think I used that phrasing. And then she'd be like, well, did you say something that carried that sentiment, even if it wasn't that exact phrasing? And he'd be like, I don't know exactly to what you're referring. And then she'd like ultimately just bring up a tweet or a statement. Like we went 10 rounds in the first 2 hours today of just her telling him he said something, or, asking him if he had said things, him avoiding the question, even when it didn't seem like it was something that needed to be avoided. And then her bringing up proof showing that he said it. And then him sort of like dancing around, acknowledging that he had said it. But he did all this while seeming incredibly, semantic and pedantic for sure, but also like an asshole. I think one person said to me, what the jury had prior to Sam taking the stand was a stick figure version of him that was this criminal CEO. And now Sam has basically gotten on the stand and breathed life into that stick figure and made that person real. That like arrogant, the rules don't apply to me person came to life before them. Now, again, you don't know how somebody's reading something. I think the alternative read to what I just described would be that Sam is somebody who is semantic and who is very frustrated by how he's being portrayed and how he's being maligned in his own head. And maybe there's a juror that interpreted his behavior today as being that. It maybe, you never know. As we're getting closer to the actual, conviction here, or like an actual deliberation, I want to acknowledge that there's room for, but boy, oh boy. So I'll give you a couple quotes, and then I want to get into some specifics here today because some of this is just funny. Like some of the avoidance here is quite funny. So we'll get into that, and I'll do my best Sam Bankman-Fried impression. But I will say there was a reporter I talked to who works for a very reputable publication. They are not covering this case in a day-to-day level. They're tasked with writing a high-level overview of the thing. So they've only been coming for the last few days to court. They haven't been here every day. So their perspective was interesting because they haven't been with us in all of the mired in all of the detail for the last 2 weeks, month really, but 2 weeks of actual days in court. And they said they came into this whole situation and after last week felt like Sam was guilty, but that he was somebody who just got in over his head, lost track of things, et cetera, and that they came out of today feeling like, oh no, I think he's much more criminal and guilty than I thought before today. I actually now think this really all just was like a ruse to get more money to his hedge fund and make a bunch of money that way. I don't personally agree with that, but it was really interesting to hear that that was somebody else's impression of his testimony today. And then a different person said to me, I left last week feeling like there was a chance that he could get one juror I thought it was a small chance, but I thought there was a chance that he could get a juror or two to be on his side or to see the nuance here. And now I think he's got a 0% chance. So again, feelings from the press corps and not all those people were press, like, you know, the public who are attending, is that he did really, really poorly today. I'll give you my deeper thoughts at the end of the video, my like slightly nuanced thoughts, but let's get into some of the meat of this testimony because I really want to paint the picture for you of what this was like. It was so exhausting. And all I could think was that maybe he was refusing to answer any questions straightforwardly. Like maybe he felt like if he says, I don't remember to stuff, that's clearly true and there's no reason to pretend you can't remember it. If that was a strategy so that when he says, I don't recall to things that actually are a lot more damning, it doesn't stand out so much. It doesn't look like he's just saying, I don't recall to the things that are damning. He's saying, I don't recall to anything. And he's just like, you know, painting this picture of somebody who's completely useless and absent-minded. That may have been the strategy in his head, but the way it's coming across is like that he's evasive and lying and guilty because there's no way he doesn't remember any of this, like everything. Like he literally is acting like he doesn't remember saying that he cared about safeguarding customer assets. And then, you know, whoop, here's the tweet of you saying that. Anyway, let's get into this. So on Friday, Sam's defense attorney was trying to counter this narrative of him as this like somebody who really loved the high life, you know, and was like hanging out with all these celebrities. And so he had asked Sam how he had ended up at this particular booth at the Super Bowl. He had gone to the Super Bowl and there was a photo taken of him with Katy Perry and Orlando Bloom and Kate Hudson and like all these celebrities. And the prosecution had showed that picture to be like, see, this guy cared about all his celebrity connections and friends and blah, blah, blah. And then the defense was trying to counter that narrative. They showed that picture again and were like, can you explain to us how this happened? And Sam was like, I was actually late for another meeting and then I ran into these guys and they called me into their booth. It was a guy named Michael Kivas. I've talked about him on episodes in the past. Okay, so now you've got the prosecution in the moment of testimony I'm about to read to y'all addressing this again. She addressed it once. The defense then came back with something. She's not coming back again. Danielle Sassoon, this is the prosecutor, the lead prosecutor for the DOJ, who is amazing. She is so good at her job. It is terrifying. So Sassoon says, you testified that you stumbled your way into Michael Kivas' Super Bowl party. Do you recall that? Sam, the seats at the actual physical Super Bowl. Yeah. Sassoon. And you flew to the Super Bowl in a private jet, didn't you? Sam. I don't remember. Sassoon. You don't recall flying to the Super Bowl in a private plane? Sam. I don't recall how I got there. Sassoon. Is that because you traveled on private planes so frequently? Sam's being so like, I don't remember how I got, like, you know, avoiding this. And then she's like, oh, let me hit you with something that makes you seem even worse. Sam, it's because I traveled over 100 times that year. I can't recall how I went any particular time. Sassoon, and many of those times on a private plane, correct? Sam, some of them, yes. Sassoon, you spent around $15 million on private jet travel while you were FTX CEO, correct? Sam, I'm not sure what the number is. At which point, Sassoon pulls up a picture of Sam in his t-shirt and shorts, shoes off, sleeping on a private jet. And then Sassoon goes, Mr. Bankman-Fried, is that you in shorts and a t-shirt on a private plane? And Sam goes, chartered plane at least, yes. Sassoon, you also hired planes to fly Amazon packages to the Bahamas for FTX, correct? Sam, not me personally. I think FTX did something of that sort. Sassoon, and you authorized that, right? Sam, yeah. Sassoon, and that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to fly packages on planes to FTX in the Bahamas. Sam, I'm not sure exactly how much it cost. Sassoon, how much would you approximate it cost? Sam, I don't know. Sassoon, so you authorized it, but you didn't know what it cost? Sam, that's correct. So it was just this. I mean, there were worse examples than this in terms of the word salad. Like, he didn't word salad this. He just didn't remember how he got to the Super Bowl. Which, again, like, maybe he's telling the truth because, like, why lie about this unless your calculus is like, I don't want to admit to flying in a private plane, and then Sassoon is Sassoon, so she got you on something worse, which is making it seem like you didn't remember you flew on the private plane because you flew on private planes so often you couldn't remember when you took them and when you didn't. But that's just a little, I mean, it was like pulling teeth for hours to get him to just answer things straight. But here's what I'll say, and this is, I guess, where I start to give my feelings and I express that I'm slightly more sympathetic to him than other people are, even though I know that's not a popular thing to say, I am a fairly semantic person. Like, I do think that semantics matter. And I do think that there were moments where, while Sam did not look good while he did this, he was homing in on semantic issues with the things she was saying that are somewhat legitimate, in the sense that, like, he was picking up on something that was slightly incorrect with the way she was framing something. I mean, I think that's the biggest thing, right? Like, she's going to put a spin on a situation that he may not agree with that spin, even if there's some of the core facts that she's asking about are true. So he won't give her a straight answer because he doesn't want to sound like he's copying to her framing of things, even if he does agree with some level of the underlying facts. And if you're like, oh, wow, I'm turning you off now because you're so irritating. I'm like, I know, I get it. And this is why Sam was so irritating to everyone in court today, because it's so semantic. I'll say more about this in a minute. I want to give an example of this, but actually, let me just give an example of this and then let me zoom out one more time. Okay, so I think where this comes up, which I think is really interesting, is when it came to talking about margin trading, because this is in some ways the core of Sam's defense, I think, though I don't think his defense attorneys have done a great job of really making this case. But at the core of his defense is customers could margin trade on FTX, which meant that they could borrow money. They could take money off of the exchange so long as they posted sufficient collateral to do so. Now, Alameda, what they did went far beyond what any other customers were allowed to do. But Sam's case is that he believed the money that Alameda was borrowing was within the bounds of what was being borrowed and loaned within the margin system on Alameda. Anyway, I know that some of this garble can get a lot, like it's a heady thing. So let's go to a specific part of the testimony where I think this will illustrate what I'm talking about. So let me find it here. Let me tell you about OpenSea Studio. Yes, you know OpenSea. Perhaps you use OpenSea, but did you know they launched OpenSea Studio? It's a one-stop shop for all creators to launch and manage their projects. Using OpenSea Studio, you can create and manage a drop end-to-end, including setting up allow list phases, uploading media and metadata, which has helpful preview functionality, and building the drop page itself. You can also mint an NFT or collection where the creator owns the contract. OpenSea Studio lets you build on all blockchains compatible with OpenSea, and there are 8 of them. Lets buyers mint an NFT from your collection using a credit or debit card, and there are no coding or technical skills required to do any of the above. OpenSea will be adding more features and functionality to OpenSea Studio over the coming months, including revamped collection pages with new storytelling modules, and more ways to leverage NFT technology, including redeemables, which y'all know I'm a huge fan of, and analytics. I'm an OpenSea user because they have the best selection of NFTs and a truly inclusive view of the NFT ecosystem, supporting, as I said, 8 chains in 8 global languages. And because I trust the systems they've built to help keep the space safe, like copyment protection, malicious URL detection or removal, robust verification, and more. It is why they are the place to buy, sell, and now create NFTs. Check them out at the link below, and you'll be supporting the show in the process. So Sassoon was trying to pin Sam down on some specific things. And I mean, I guess, to be fair, she wasn't totally able to. So specifically, she wanted to get Sam to admit that he had approved or directed, one or the other, Caroline Ellison to repay loans made by third-party lenders to Alameda. So as folks will remember, there's all these third-party lenders that lent money to Alameda that they would trade with, and they started to recall those loans or to ask for that money back in June of 2022 because of the market implosions that had happened in May of that year. So Sassoon wanted Sam to admit that he knew or directed or acknowledged or whatever that Caroline was going to pay third-party lenders back, and that to do so, they were going to have to use FTX customer money. That was sort of what she was trying to pin Sam down on. And so now let's turn to some of the transcript. Okay. Sassoon. And you understood in the discussions you were having around that time being like the June 2022 period, that to repay Alameda's lenders would require Alameda to borrow more money from FTX, right? Sam, no. Sassoon. That's your testimony? Sam, that's correct. Sassoon. So it's your testimony that you did not know repaying Alameda's lenders would involve borrowing money from FTX? Sam, that is correct. Sassoon. Isn't it true that you had a meeting in FTX's Bahamas office with Caroline and other employees? Sam, there were discussions, yeah. Sassoon. And during this meeting, didn't you discuss that Alameda's access to third-party loans was being pulled back and it might need to borrow more from FTX? Sam, that's not my memory of it. Sassoon. we talked earlier about an interview you did with Josh Oliver. Do you recall that, Sam? Which is this the December interview? Sassoon, yes. And then they talk a little bit more. This, just to give context, Sam did an interview with a guy named Josh Oliver in December of 2022, shortly after FTX had collapsed, but before he had been indicted, which is something that Sassoon has been eager to point out to everybody because she's trying to paint the picture like, Sam was willing to speak freely then because he didn't necessarily know he was in trouble yet or whatever. Sam has said that he suspected there were rumors that he was going to be arrested and he suspected he would be arrested. So like that it's not entirely true to say that he was speaking freely only because he thought he wasn't in trouble or whatever. In any case, he did this interview with a guy, Josh Oliver, and it's something that we had referenced previously throughout this day because he made a number of statements that were probably inadvisable. And by the way, like that was the first half of today was just Sassoon being like, here's all these things you've said publicly. And then him being like, I don't remember saying these things. I don't know. I don't remember. Okay. So she's asking, remember that this particular article we've been talking about with Josh Oliver amidst this whole thing where he's trying to say like he doesn't remember saying that that Alameda was going to have to borrow money from FTX in order to pay back lenders. And then Sassoon says, and in this interview with Josh Oliver, didn't you state that you met with employees who said that Alameda's access to third-party loans is being cut back and it might need to borrow more money from FTX? Sam, I don't remember exactly what I said to him or the context. I did not believe that Alameda did need to borrow from FTX in order to process the loan repayments. Sassoon, yes or no? Do you recall saying that in that meeting, it was stated that Alameda would need to borrow more from FTX to repay its loans? And then Sam totally word salads here. I don't even know I think Sam word saladed, and I don't know if maybe this transcript is slightly off, but what it says he said was, I'm not sure whether or not that was floated out at one point or another. My memory is that was ultimately decided that was not the case and that the financials confirmed that was not the case. I mean, he definitely probably said something along these lines, which again, I said this last week. It is impossible to take notes on this dude. Like I cannot take notes. I mean, that's a lie because I took so many notes, but like it's so hard to take notes on him because he just word salads so many things. So this might be slightly off, but it also could be right. And he's basically being like, no, I didn't think they were going to have to borrow money from FTX. Who the hell knows? Whatever. Okay. Then she pulls up the article where Josh Oliver quotes him as saying the thing he's saying he didn't say, which is like, again, the story of today. And we just go back and forth on that longer. So yes or no, do you recall saying that you decided to extend Alameda more credit at this time? Sam, I don't recall saying that. I'm not sure. I didn't say that, something sort of like that. So he said, I don't recall saying that. I'm not sure. I didn't say something sort of like that. Whatever. So now this leads us to this margin piece because she's trying to get him to say that he approved loans from FTX to Alameda that was used with customer money. And she's trying to say like, there we go. We have the smoking gun. This is a crime. He's going to argue that if Alameda borrowed money to repay lenders, that could have been within the context of a margin loan, which would have been legal within the terms of service of FTX. So let's get to that real quick here. So she's saying, when you agreed with Caroline that she should repay lenders in June, you knew at the time that this put the FTX exchange at risk, didn't you? Sam says, that's not how I was thinking of it, blah, blah, blah. Then he says, there's always a risk with margin trading that there would be clawbacks. We've talked about clawbacks before on this show. It's basically the idea that you socialize losses, that if one customer who's trading on margin loses a lot of money because they weren't liquidated fast enough, that you have to take basically from the profits of other customers on margin to like make up the losses of that customer is a very shorthanded way of describing clawbacks. And it was always like this point of pride for FTX that they reduced the risk of clawbacks. But what Sam is saying here is there's always a risk of margin trading. There's always a risk with margin trading that there would be clawbacks. So he's trying to position this like, if Alameda did in fact borrow money from FTX to repay its lenders, sure, maybe I would have said that posed some level of risk to FTX, but it would only be within the normal level of risk that is always associated with margin trading. Sassoon then says, that's not my question, Mr. Bankman-Fried. My question is whether in June of 2022, you knew that there was a risk that Alameda specifically might not be able to repay its debts to FTX. Then Sam, once again, kind of word salads. I don't remember thinking of it that way. The level of risk is never zero for margin trading. So this is where it gets interesting because Sassoon says, Mr. Bankman-Fried, I didn't ask you about margin trading. I'm asking about Alameda's debt to FTX and whether you understood in June of 2022 that there was a risk that Alameda could not repay that debt. Sam says, okay. I did not think of that at the time as being a significant risk, but I would not have said that there was no risk at all. She says, just to be clear, Mr. Bankman-Fried, taking money from FTX to pay back lenders, that's not margin trading, is it? And Sam says, I don't think that's what happened. I'm also not saying that's not margin trading. I'm going to start to summarize this here instead of putting you through this, the like teeth pulling that is this testimony. Here's where the breakdown is happening. Sassoon is saying repaying lenders, like third-party lenders of Alameda by borrowing from FTX is not margin trading. And he's saying that's not necessarily true. Weirdly, I think he's right on this. Now, she doesn't give him the opportunity to expound. He specifically says, like, no, I don't think you're right on that. I think this does sound like margin trading and I can explain it. And she just fully moves on. Like, she doesn't want him to explain it at all. But I'm assuming what he's referring to is it is actually true. And you can see this on blockchain explorers and things. In the week period that's being described here, Alameda posted about $2 billion worth of FTT tokens onto the FTX exchange. Sassoon and Sam were talking in this transcript. Sam said he believed it was about $1 billion that had to be repaid to lenders during that time. I think that number actually went up from there afterwards, but let's just go with the number $1 billion because that's what Sassoon and Sam were working off of. So if in that week, Alameda posted $2 billion worth of FTT to FTX, and they borrowed $1 billion to then repay lenders. I think Sam's right. I mean, they took basically an over-collateralized loan from FTX to repay its lenders. They're allowed to do what they want with that money once they've posted the collateral. Here's the problem, though, and this is going to get into generally the problem with Sam, as if there's only one. FTT was bullshit. And yes, obviously you can say that there were periods of time in 2021, 2022 where the coin had real value. I mean, it traded between like $20 and $60 for basically all of 2022. You had similar numbers in 2021. You had Binance accepting FTT tokens as payment for like buying back shares of FTX. This was something that had value at one point, but Sam is just too smart to not realize what a ridiculous inherent systemic risk it was to be using FTT as collateral, as basically the exclusive collateral that Alameda was posting on the exchange. And this is so crucial because Sam makes this mistake or uses this manipulatively a lot. Like, the core of his argument is Alameda was using the margin system and posting enough collateral within the margin system, and Alameda had a positive NAV, net asset value. Alameda's NAV was positive. He says that over and over again to sort of justify his thinking on everything. Was like, I wasn't too worried about this, that, or the other thing, or I didn't think anything was too wrong because their NAV was still super positive. And he keeps saying their NAV was positive by about $10 billion, which means they have more assets than liabilities, to the tune of $10 billion. So he felt like everything's fine as long as NAV is positive. But, and I've talked about this in the show, $3 billion of that $10 billion NAV number that Sam brings up over and over again was FTT, and that was the mark-to-market rate. So if you had actually tried to sell $3 billion of FTT at any point, I mean, and you're selling it as Alameda, very correlated to FTX, I don't know what you would have ended up getting for that $3 billion FTT, $1 billion of it. I mean, it would have absolutely collapsed the price. And frankly, there probably wasn't enough liquidity. Like, you didn't have enough people you could dump it on. So the real scenario is that you actually probably just couldn't even sell the thing, and you would have collapsed the price, which of course, by the way, is what happened. The other big part of their NAV, like the assets that were making them have a positive NAV, were tokens like Solana and Serum, which were also correlated with all of this stuff. So of course, what ended up happening is Solana prices started going down. And again, if Alameda had started dumping Solana in the marketplace at any point, that would have started to drive the price down too. That would have made other people very nervous. And Sam is just too smart to not understand that. I mean, that's pretty basic if you're trying to do some sort of a calculation that's honestly reflecting and giving you an honest look at the health of your organizations. So bringing it back to this conversation about margin, here's the broader point I want to make. I think Sam was actually right and scored a few points on some semantic specific things over the course of his testimony today. I could point to other examples. Like there was just a number of moments where I'm like, yeah, I think you're right, or I think the way that Sassoon is framing this is a little bit off and trying to serve her purpose. And so there were like little victories like that. Assuming the jury cares, which again, I like happen to be a very semantic person, so I think it's totally reasonable to think that other people maybe wouldn't care about that at all. But anyways, he may have won some small semantic victories. But in a bigger picture way, I think Sassoon has to be coming out of this very happy because she was able to show so many public statements that were made. I mean, we looked at statements that were in documents that were submitted to Congress as part of the testimony he gave under oath to Congress, talking about safeguarding customer assets and risk and managing risk and all these things that clearly substantively were not happening in private with FTX and Alameda. Alameda being the company that he owned 90% of, FTX being the company he was the CEO of and owned 65% of. And he just seemed like an asshole. So like, yes, you maybe scored some semantic victory points and that's not worth nothing. But in a bigger picture sense, you turned off the jury. You seemed incredibly unlikable, or I'm assuming you turned off the jury because you seemed incredibly unlikable. And a picture was still able to be painted by the prosecution while you were sitting at the stand about how many misrepresentations were made publicly, even if technically speaking, that thing was kind of technically true in this one context, in this one month, in this one time, right? That was really the summary of today. So anyway, I really appreciate y'all following along. We do not have that much left of this trial. I mean, they're thinking that evidence is basically going to wrap up tomorrow. We're going to finish cross-examining Sam. There'll be some redirect. There's going to be a small rebuttal case by the prosecution, but all of this should really wrap by tomorrow, end of day. And then we're moving into closing statements and jury instructions and then deliberations. So everything in this case takes longer than we expect it to, but in theory, we'll be wrapping evidence tomorrow and we'll get closing statements on Wednesday, and I will be there for every bit of it to tell you what you need to know. Thank you so much for checking out this video. Please do like, subscribe, comment. I love reading your comments, and I'll see you tomorrow.